Welcome to episode number 2 of the Wheels and Beyond podcast, where conversations about safer streets, traffic reduction, and how people get around their cities motivates us to keep building this awesome community of like-minded people. I'm your host, Ben Durham, and today our guest is Jamieson Roberts, who is a parent, bicycle rider, geek, a video and board gamer, coffee addict, and sci-fi junkie. During the day, he is a full-time software engineer with over 15 years of professional experience in web and software development. So, without further ado, let's jump right into this conversation. You and your wife have 2 cargo bikes, yes?
Yep.
Awesome. And you have 2 kids, too.
Yep.
So, just to start this off, do you have a car?
We do.
Okay.
It is not our primary mode of transportation.
Okay. And I actually thought you were entirely carless.
Nope. We do have a car. And honestly, the only reason why we have it is because it was a wonderful gift from my father years ago, and we don't really have plans to replace it. When it dies, it dies.
That's awesome. So like with that, immediately I'm starting to ask about the car. Wow. But no, if you primarily use the cargo bike, when do you use the car?
Trips out of town, like family trips out of town, going to the beach, for example, which arguably, if we didn't have a car, we'd rent a car, we'd go with family. Like there are so many other options that it really wouldn't matter all that much.
Yeah.
Okay. Every once in a while when it's absolutely pouring rain, we'll go do a grocery trip by car, but it is not necessarily the first choice.
I find that, we use it when we are intercity travel. That's when we use it for almost extensively, when we're going to Toronto or up to Ottawa.
I would use that as a caveat. I can't remember the last time I've driven to Toronto.
So when we fly out, which is, if we're talking environmental, is not great.
It highlights a great thing, which is, yes, there are needs to travel beyond the sphere of, the 5 kilometers.
Yeah.
And I think my favorite flight, I should say, took the train to Toronto, hopped on the UP Express, and then flew, which it was easy and carefree. And this was also like, when people were forced to wear masks, required to wear masks, I shouldn't say forced, required to wear masks, and like the train and transit was so much nicer than being on an airplane with a mask on.
Yes.
So
it's just so much spaciousness. Well, that's what I was going to say about the flying. It's like, okay, aside from environmental stuff being like the end of the trip being a flight, we take the bus now because it is literally more convenient and saves us money, even if it's like $50 to whatever it comes to. Round trip comes to, I don't know, let's say $80, which is excessive if you're in Europe and you're like, the heck? For a 2-hour thing? It's like, what? But no.
For North America, that's cheap.
Yeah, it's not too bad. That's for 2 people too, by the way, round trip. And so we go there, and you can actually go, instead of the train, you can go directly from a few different spots around London. So in our case, like near Fanshawe College is pretty close to us. So it stops there. One time we took an Uber over, the other time we walked, and another time I think we carpooled with a friend because it was raining. We're like, we were going to walk. We walked past their house, like knocked on the door. Can you drive us instead? It was a very like small town vibe there.
Yeah. The reality is ultimately that, I prefer taking the train, and I fully recognize that I am privileged to be able to do so given the expensiveness of train travel in North America. But for me, it's also a nostalgia hit because my dad worked for CN. So for me, there is absolutely the nostalgia hit of growing up around trains with my dad.
I have to ask you, this is if you grew up with trains, you'll know this. The Via Rail new seats in the cars.
Yep.
They are so uncomfortable compared to the old ones. The old ones are nice and cushy. There's only a few in circulation still of the old train cars.
I still will take the new cars over the old ones though, because of all the other creature comforts.
Okay, yeah, that is fair. It's just
although having seen now the new rolling stock that's going to be coming through soon, it looks awesome and it has space for bikes.
Yes, the fact that trains don't have an extra car for bikes by default is weird to me, because like that's the perfect multimodal thing. That's what we would do if we were going to Toronto.
Folding bike, pop it in there like...
Full-size bike, maybe? I don't know. But yeah, I have a few questions here now that we've already been chatting about that. So you own one car, and you're in downtown London.
Yep.
And so where do you park? Do you get a parking spot with your apartment?
Yep. There's a parking spot in the basement. It's underground covered parking. Obviously we pay for it, etc. It's because parking is not free. The car lives down there when we're not using it, and otherwise we bring the bikes up into our apartment because there isn't any safe parking there. Bicycle storage type thing, which is a huge design problem, but we can get into that later, just with apartment dwelling in general. Yeah. But that's also part of the reason why we bought the bikes we did, because we bought the turn line because you can park them on their butt and you can park 2 bikes in the space of 1. So when you're in an apartment and space is premium, it's just the absolute perfect feature.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because those ones, they have little... It's such a small little design touch. It's just 2 little feet at the back, right?
4.
So it's 4 at the
back,
at the bottom. And
yeah, it's like a rectangle. Yeah.
Okay, because I was referring to the at the top of the rack. Yep. It's a normal rack, except for it has 2 little feet that pop out.
Yeah.
And so it just bonkers that with that simple amount of engineering and thought or thoughtfulness, you can have a bike that just sits upright. It's bonkers.
And I mean, these are not, they're not light bicycles. It's arguably annoying to have to lift them up in the elevator and stuff like that.
They are heavy.
But the amount of stuff that you can carry with them, be it people or otherwise, it just makes it that much easier to get around. And yeah, being able to park 2 of them in the physical footprint of 1 bicycle means that, it's not a problem that, my oldest has a bike of her own, for example. And when we need to get a small kiddo bike for my youngest, then there'll be space too. So
I'm just thinking of that amount of space that it takes up, and did you consider, and then quickly not consider, the Urban Arrow style bikes? Are they box Fiats? I forget how to pronounce them. Box Fiats?
Box Fiats are a specific type, so they're the box bikes, and I believe Urban Arrow fits in there. Yeah. We did have a Babbo tricycle, and it was arguably probably my favorite bicycle ever.
And so for those who don't know, those are the ones with the 2 wheels at the front and 1 at the back.
Yep, and a big box for your stuff, for your kids, and they're so easy and simple to ride. And the trike is amazing in the winter. You don't have to worry about anything.
Did you put studs on it?
Yep.
Okay, so you
just on the front.
Just on the front. And then that's what I do with my normal bicycle, but there's no way that thing could fall, right?
No. No. The only reason why we ended up getting rid of it and selling it and passing along to someone else to absolutely love was just purely storage. There is no safe place in our apartment building that we could keep it. It's a tricycle. We're not bringing it into our apartment. And there just started to be little bits of damage as our unhoused neighbors would go through the parking garage, there's a, string of twinkle lights and they've shredded it. Oh, our blanket's now gone. Little things like that. And I can't fault our unhoused neighbors. They are in such a perilous situation. I can't be mad at them for trying to find what they can to try and survive. But it also means that it wasn't safe ultimately for us to keep the trike.
Yeah. Where did you park it?
Literally behind our car.
Okay, I was going to ask because you have a parking spot. I was wondering.
So while we had that, we had a dual parking spot. Oh. And so our car would park in front and we'd literally park the bike behind with an alarm lock around it. And it's heavy enough. It's a tricycle. It was triple locked with an alarm. If at that point someone managed to steal it,
you earned it.
You earned it. I will go to my insurance. As I was wisely told long ago, you secure it against the amateurs and you insure it against the pros.
I like that saying.
if you put enough locks on it, it's going to discourage the person randomly walking by with a grinder that's going to, a battery operated grinder that's going to steal your bike. If a bicycle thief wants your bike bad enough,
they'll take it.
They will figure out how to take it. And so when you're dealing with a cargo bicycle or, a more expensive bicycle, you insure it. And away you go. And that's just it. We insure our vehicles, we insure our cars against theft, and arguably more so against liability of driving a dangerous vehicle. But there is the theft component there as well. And operating a bicycle in terms of theft and preventing against that or recuperating from it is no different.
The crazy thing is that the insurance, at least for us, because Natalia and I, I'm laughing there because I said Natalia and I, and your wife, you would say Nadia and I.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's very similar in names. So Natalia and I, we insure our bikes. And I think it's for both of our bikes, $60 a year or something.
Yeah.
It might be slightly more for you. I don't know.
Mine's a little bit more. I know I definitely get dinged a little bit because of my postal code. Because there's a higher rate of theft near my postal code.
Interesting. And here I thought actually we had a higher theft, but I guess just because of the density?
Yeah. I think in general, London it's fairly common, but I've been told, supposedly. But also when you're insuring a $10,000 cargo bike, the costs are a little bit more. Also, my plan has no deductible, which is nice.
That is nice.
So I pay a little bit more, but if something does happen, I'm not out any money.
Yeah.
And I can replace it. And yeah, it'll suck, but that's
life.
That's life.
Yeah, that's life with a car too. The amount of neighbors. Okay, we're not going to paint like London as, everything's happening. No, in every city around the world, there are car thefts every single day. Actually, debatably, way more in the GTA right now, so the Greater Toronto area.
But it doesn't even necessarily have to be the whole car. Look at last year where they were stealing catalytic converters because of the recovery, the
minerals.
Palladium and other rare earth metals are used to strip out harmful emissions as best they can. Yeah. So, they don't even necessarily have to steal the whole car for it to get to the point where you need to go to your insurance to recuperate those costs.
Which then raises insurance for everyone. Yep. Yay. So moving on from insurance, when it comes to the cargo bikes and your kid hauling, we did a ride along just this morning right before we showed up here, and we dropped off your kids.
Yep.
And you were commenting on how your neighbor is it a truck or a car, or either way, they drive a kilometer to drop off their kid at school.
Yeah.
That, unfortunately, is fairly common in North America.
And I would also say the school that my kids go to has a very high rate of people who don't do that. And I would probably guess that if I had to guess, probably abnormally higher than a lot of places. I think the school that my kids go to is we are very lucky in terms of how everything is set up, where it does encourage a lot of people to walk, and people do choose to walk and ride and that type of thing. But yeah, there are a lot of people that drop their kid off to school by car and then drive another kilometer as opposed to maybe just walking. And I get it, on a hot day like this, you want the comfort of your portable living room. Okay. I understand. But this is an abnormal week with the heat dome. That's not an everyday thing. And choosing to do it every single day is not helpful for anyone.
I heard this online from a car channel. It's very relevant to this. They said, don't buy the car for the once or twice per year where you're going to do a car trip. It's in the US to like Minnesota or something, where you have to have like a big car with blah, 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 this, that for the family. Get something for your everyday. That actually applies to not only a car, but a bike. Where I hope this is obvious, but like almost every day you can get by with your bicycle.
Yep.
And that's that. Like saves on if if Nadia and you had to have a car each, because this is not something I've covered ever before. But
the finances alone, forget everything else, but just purely the financial imposition it would put us in would be astronomical. The CAA has an absolutely fantastic calculator that they keep up to date. And the last time I looked at it, a year ago, maybe 2 years ago,
10,000, I think,
per year for a car, and for one car. And to put it in context, that's your car loan, that is your insurance, that is your gas, and that is your maintenance averaged over the course of the year.
And depreciation, I believe. Yeah.
Yes.
I think they also factor that in.
Yeah. Okay, so you buy a used car so you don't have the car payment. Okay, fine. Like, yes, there's a way to minimize it, but you're still looking at minimum, 5 to 6K probably a year, just to own and operate a vehicle. And a lot of that cost ends up being hidden. It's really easy to forget that, you've just put $100 of gas in the tank, and you just hop in your car and you just go. You've forgotten about that cost that you are continually accruing. If you drive a vehicle for work, you're acutely aware of this because you are acutely aware of how much you can request in remuneration for kilometers driven.
I'm always surprised by that. I'm like, holy crap, it costs this much to drive? Yeah, the government states
this is how much how much you should be remunerated for driving, which people just forget about because it's the fallacy of convenience. Tom Flood has this wonderful saying, which is, bicycles deliver the freedom that auto adds the promise. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but it goes beyond just like the convenience of getting to the door and stuff like that. But there's also there's all of these sunk cost fallacies in driving that people forget about all the actual true costs. And that's before you even touch on the societal impacts. The societal impacts take you even further down a rabbit hole.
It is insane how much. Do you know off the top of your head that stat about every kilometer biked saves society, 75 cents, I think?
I thought it was less than that, but I thought walking is like the pinnacle.
Yeah, it's like boom, way up there.
Walking, biking, transit, and then every kilometer you drive is it costs society $1 plus.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think the stat that I saw just the other day, because I was looking it up for some reason or another, I think it was like $4 or something. I think it's so backwards. It's so the other way.
The original infographic I remember from that was from Vancouver from the early 2000s. So since then, obviously with inflation, it's gone up. But ultimately the takeaway from it is that anytime you are driving, you are costing not only yourself, but you are costing your community money.
Yep. And it's invisible.
And it's largely invisible. People complain about the cost of their property taxes and taxation systems. And there's a whole conversation there around regressive tax and not. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you want to drive your vehicle on a road that is maintained and not pothole driven or a dirt road, even a dirt road, we all have to contribute to that being built and maintained. And every single time you drive that vehicle over that road, you are causing a small amount of damage. And that small amount of damage builds up over time.
And just so if people haven't seen this picture, it's a graph, and it's like the fat man on a bike, and it's like that's like the excessive amount of this is the heaviest possible, carrying cargo, large guy, and it's like 200 pounds or something. 300 pounds, whatever. Yep. And it's like, okay, this amount of damage. It's nothing for road damage. Meanwhile, tractor trailers, way up there. That's a whole other story about rails.
Isn't the stat ultimately that it would take 5 to 10,000 bicycle trips to do the same damage of one car.
Yes, and I think these stats are actually more insane than that. I think it's over 100 or 200,000 trips by a bike equals how much one single car trip. I wonder how wrong I am in that, but I thought it was like astronomically large. Like, I mean, 10,000 is already insane for just a single trip. But I think it's up in like 100,000 or something.
Something that gets missed in a lot of the arguments, and I see this all the time online, is like, well, what do you mean? We need to ride our bikes everywhere, blah, blah, blah. Like all of these, all stereotype here, and I hate stereotypes, but there is generally some truth in there of like people being angry about bicycles and stuff like that. We're not asking you to ditch your car forever. We're asking you to like make 1 or 2 trips a week. And the reality is like, if you take a look at people, people going to the office, if you do 1 day a week, walking, biking, taking transit, you have removed 1/5 of your impact. And when you put it in context like that, it sounds a lot larger. You don't have to convert every single part of your day or your routine to taking transit, to walking, to riding your bike. Start small, because 20% is still a pretty hefty number.
It's massive. So I call it that. Any subtitles are going to be generated from this, because I'm definitely not doing that for this podcast, but it's going to say it wrong because it's the halving effect. And I've never seen this anywhere, but it's like, okay, if you can, it's not halving, it's halving the, the halving
Cutting
effect.
in half.
Cutting in half effect. And it's insane. So yeah, if you just do 1 trip per week, you cut down, I don't know, like 10% of your drives. I don't know how much you're driving, but if you do it twice, now you're doubling the amount of the amount that you're biking. It's crazy. And then there's also the effect of just a little bit further, or 1 more trip, or can I do this on a bike too? And you keep on just expanding, and eventually,
and it doesn't have to be bike either. It can be walking, it can be transit. It's not about you having to astronomically, there are so many other ways to get around your city. I remember there's a clip from the recent filming that you've shared of
the street project.
Street project, yeah. It's like there's, especially here in London, there's so many derogatory terms for transit.
Was this Cheryl?
Yes, it was Cheryl's quote around like, okay, but if I'm, by all accounts well off and I'm taking this, that's clearly how you view me, even though I'm, by all accounts probably your peer in an economic sense.
For reference and context, this is Cheryl, and she was on stage on a panel, and she was saying that a business owner said, oh, we don't want those people showing up, so we don't want, it was either we don't want LRT or we want our parking spots to stay. Yes, always contentious with business owners, but
it ties into the as Cheryl said, the welfare wagon, people consider, especially in London, there is a perception
and a stigma
that if you are taking transit, and you want to know what, even people on transit, I think back to when my kiddos were a lot younger, we took the bus over to the farmers market on the weekend, because sometimes it's nice to not ride over there. Sometimes it's nice to be driven. Especially when at the time we had a stroller, and we literally had one of the kids was fussing a little bit, and we had this wonderfully sweet older woman say, "Oh, you should get a car." Literally, someone else on the bus telling us that we should get a car because we had a kid on the bus.
What? That's impossible. Why don't you have a car? Oh, wait, you do. What?
Oh, wait, we do. We just choose not to use it.
Exactly. Which, okay, this comes up a lot. You're going to hear it a lot on this podcast, but every car off the road, like every single person, all 4 of you, that was like a car off the road in that case. But most people you see, every individual out there, that is an entire car, because most trips are single occupancy.
Yeah.
So it's like
Most people, statistically speaking, are traveling on their own without other people in their portable living room.
I've never heard that, and I don't know how I have it because I will.
But the reality, but that's what it is. You are enclosed. You have air conditioning and heating.
cup holders.
You are literally in a portable living room. I can't take credit for that. I've heard that from I heard that from someone else.
Just you also have the couches.
Yep. You have the couches.
Adjustable, reclinable too.
Yep, exactly. So like,
I love it.
when we're talking about, and I don't know how to put this without it coming across like a dick, but ultimately, the absolute pure sense of entitlement.
Yep.
And when you frame it like, oh, you're having fun driving, moving around in your portable living room, it kind of puts it in its place.
Yeah. And then people are fine with that though, because they're like, hey,
and I say this many times to people. It's like, oh, well, my job, I have to drive around because I have to visit like 20 different sites because of my job. Great. I'm not asking you to give up your car.
Exactly. Thank you. Like, I'm also not saying that. I'm saying maybe if you only have to go to 2 sites, maybe you could bike or something. I don't know. Depending on
if you're working in the office,
yeah,
chances are you probably don't. Now that does piggyback into an absolutely wonderful conversation though around right now. It is absolutely difficult if you're, say, an office worker to want to ride your bike to work. And there's a couple of things in play here. One, obviously, is infrastructure. Most of our city and most of North American cities are not designed in a way where you can casually ride to the office. And
which a lot of what we're talking about is just casual riding. It's not recreational. Very different if you didn't know.
Yeah, like I'm not not putting on spandex and doing a 50-kilometer bike ride. I'm talking about going 2 or 3 kilometers to get to the office, maybe 5. But the reality is that when you are in mixed traffic as a bike rider, there is inherent psychological urge to try to go the speed of traffic, which means that you are pushing yourself hard to try and keep up, which means that yes, you get into the office hot and sweaty.
Which is where e-bikes come in, but that shouldn't be.
But even regardless of that, like I can still work my butt off on an e-bike. It's ultimately about if you have safe and protected infrastructure, you are removed from the traffic and you can go a more comfortable and casual speed.
I want to add on that. It's not about maximum speed ever, even if you're driving, but with bikes, it's average speed.
Yep.
It's kind of why the Idaho stop is so prevalent for other reasons too, but it's maybe another topic, but I don't know.
But the reality is like, if you have a safe and protected ride, like if you are fortunate to live in, let's say, the Oak Ridge area here in London and you work downtown, you have, for the most part, the TVP to get to the office. You don't have to race. You can go chill. You can go casual, which means that when you get into the office, okay, maybe you need to change your shirt on a heat dome day like today, but on most of the year, assuming that the path is clear, you can get in and you not be sweaty at all.
Yeah. I have to say the trails, so nice because also the way trees work, you got shade and I forget what it's called, but they release all that nice moisture. Yeah. And just, it's so nice.
But like, there's so many different things in play to get back to that is, if there isn't infrastructure, then you feel like you have to race. And if you feel like you have to race, then, or you choose to, then you need other infrastructure at the end so that you can shower and get presentable for work. So like, there's all of these structural, and there's even just the societal pressure that everything has to be done instantly and now.
That's a huge thing.
And so there's just all of these things that make it feel like it's impossible. I'll get back to you. When I used to work in the office, I remember that every Friday, especially in the summertime, the CFO would actually, he would ride in and he knew that he was going to ride in, and he purposely blocked off his calendar. But he was purposely choosing to do so because he wanted to have a chill day in the summer. He didn't want to have a day full of meetings and stuff like that. He wanted to get shit done. And the reality is that like, it also set a tone because everyone on Fridays was more chill.
Yeah.
And more people were walking and stuff like that. But because there was that leadership from the top down, it's okay if we just have a chill day.
The same thing actually happened, less so with biking, but I was working at a company in North York, which is just north of Toronto. And I was there for a year and a half, 2, something like that. And it was really cool to see. A lot of people did drive in. Yep. But there was this reimbursement bit where you get $100. It's just $100, sure, whatever. But if you don't drive and you don't need a parking spot, you get $100 added to your paycheck. Done. If you drive once, I think you either paid for parking and you could use that. So like as a contingency, be like, oh, I need to park today. Sure, congrats. But as long as you were under like a few days, so some people did that. We're like, oh yeah. The thing is, it's Toronto. You do not save time when you are driving.
In fact, it takes you more time.
Exactly. Way more, like insanely more time. So
but it's the same economic argument and we'll get into this contentious topic of carbon pricing. Yep. You know, for the average Canadian, believe it or not, you are getting more money once a quarter than you are spending in carbon costs.
Yeah. It's those outliers in the top, whatever, let's say 10% of polluters driving ungodly amounts of kilometers that are getting taxed. Yep. That's how that works.
But even just like there are exemptions for people who legitimately do need to do it. And don't get me wrong, I've seen some absolutely wonderful commentary from say Kelly Elliott talking about like there is still a higher burden on like the agricultural industry than there probably should be, especially given that they are literally feeding us. Yep. And you want to know what? I'm fine with that. It's about putting subtle and gentle pressures to change habits. And honestly, more so on industry, not on the average Canadian. But
yeah, like an individual or family basis.
An individual or family basis shouldn't be astronomically impacted by it. But you want to know what? If you are in a carbon intensive business or industry and they've done carve outs where there are legitimately not alternatives right now. Mm-hmm. And that's fine. We can spend the time and resources to innovate for those things. But if you are in an industry where there are alternatives, where you don't need to do these things, where you can scrub and cut down on the amount of stuff, and you're not, you should absolutely be paying for it.
Just so people don't think we're glossing over it. It is very interesting to me. They're like, oh, well, if we tax them too hard, they'll just go elsewhere. That argument it's both true, but also not. It takes a lot of resources and time and effort to relocate an entire business, and profit margins are already fairly high in certain industries that they're like, okay, you know what? We can accept that tax.
All you have to do is look at that plant down in Windsor that just recently said they were shutting down. They're not moving elsewhere. They're just closing up shop. They are not going to move that as far as I know. They're just shutting down.
Now, I'm not familiar with that. Can you fill me in?
So it's been kind of quietly under the radar. Basically, in the Sarnia-Windsor area, there's a lot of petrochemical stuff. And one of the First Nations groups down there was seeing, even though this company was saying that they were following everything, they were seeing obscene levels of benzene in their community. And
I'm assuming they had testing done and everything.
They had testing done. It wasn't just sort of thought, like just spontaneously thought. They were doing testing, and the Ontario government slapped them with fines and stopped production. And basically, the company said, "Well, for us to actually solve this, it's going to cost more than what it's worth." It's kind of the short version of how I read it, and so they're just shutting down.
Yep.
And don't get me wrong, it absolutely sucks for the people who work there, 100%. And it's interesting you bring up this topic though around like the whole moving. I actually don't see the moving argument quite as much as the whole like, well, why should we do our part if China's not doing their part, and they are, 1.4 billion people or whatever the number the CCP puts out, and they're producing all this coal power and all of this blah, 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 blah. It's like, why do we have to do it? Well, shouldn't they be doing more? Yes, and
Yeah.
if we all live on this same globe, and if we expect them to do work, we also have to do the work. It's not a one or the other. Yes, theoretically, they are producing more per capita. I would argue not.
I was going to say North America, so US and Canada. Actually, Canada is, I think, one of in the top 10 garbage producers per capita in the world.
Yeah.
And we only have, I think we're probably at 40 million people, right?
41, I think, was the most recent number.
We were just at like 35 mil. Anyway.
Yeah, still less than the population of California.
Yeah, which is bonkers. And yes, we're all spread out 100 kilometers from the border of the US, blah, 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 whatever. But like, we generate so much CO2 and trash and
CO2e, CO2 equivalent
per capita that it is ridiculous. If China did that, the world would end. Okay, that's just me saying that, but like that would be insanity.
But ultimately, it's the whole notion of compromise. Like, in a functional society, everyone compromises. In a functional community, in a functional friend group, everyone compromises. And the idea behind a compromise is that everyone should be relatively content. No, you're not going to be happy, but for you,
I mean, you can be happy.
But there are scenarios where, like, for you to be happy, it means that someone else has to be very not happy. And the art of compromise is coming to a position where everyone is generally content. And ultimately, to a certain extent, it's what we have to do with carbon emissions is, yes, China has to do stuff. And we also have to as well.
Yeah.
Yes, the US has to do stuff. And we also have to as well.
We can be leaders. We can say, hey, we're doing this and it's helping. And yes, we have a lesser population, but imagine what, let's say, another country with a huge population looks at us and we're like, and they're like, holy crap, what if we did that? Boom, like huge percentages dropped. And it just makes a lot of sense. It doesn't not make sense. And it also encourages innovation.
We are all fleshy meat bags on the same ball of, 50 kilometers of oxygen spinning around the sun.
It's an eloquent way of putting it. I like it.
Actually, less than 50 kilometers.
Well, back over to the question list here. Okay, so I have one other one here. You're mostly work from home, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm very fortunate that I work from home. I work for a Vancouver-based company, which also means that I get some occasional work trips out to a very, very different structural city in terms of how you get around it, for the most part.
So that was Vancouver or Victoria?
Vancouver.
Okay. If you had to go back into the office, this is one of my questions here.
Yep.
How would you manage your commute? Which, as I'm asking this, is kind of funny because you're already downtown, right? Like you might actually change it to walking.
So I used to work for a company here in London.
Okay.
And actually part of the reason why we live downtown is because of that. Because I would much rather have a 15-minute walk or a 5-minute bike ride to get to the office. And Nadia's job, she's, a couple of different ones have also been in the core, or not, but being in the core means that you're equidistant to all the edges of the city. So it's a lot easier to go elsewhere. But yeah, like part of the reason why we moved down here was purely because of it being close to jobs. And so, yeah, that ultimately that's where, like, if I was forced to say go into the office again, and we had to move and relocate and something like that, we would be looking for something where it was close to where we worked ultimately.
Yeah. I had someone say the other day, I rolled up on my bike for a gig, just doing some real estate shoots. And they're like, oh man, you got to get a car. Like, I was like, one, we have one. Two, why? And I just was very blunt to this guy. And he's like, well, like, I don't know. I don't even know what he said because it didn't matter. And my immediate response was like, I would have to make an extra 80K to do that. I could rent a car, I could Uber everywhere. It would still be so much cheaper than owning a second vehicle, because our current vehicle, this is funny, I don't know if you suffered with this with your car, because it sits for so long, the brake rotors start dying, and so we have to do our brake rotors, which is fine, whatever.
There's arguably more maintenance involved when you don't drive a vehicle.
Yeah, and it's like, dang it. So we try at least once per week to get it out at over 20 kilometers, and we fail. It's usually at least every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks that we go and get it off of the driveway. In our case, we have that driveway. Yeah. And our neighbors probably think we're crazy because the car just sits there, and then they see us pass our car.
But that's the chief, like that's the thing that it ties it back to the conversation around like convenience, is that people forget the fact that 95% of the time, your vehicle is literally sitting there doing nothing. And no amount of autonomous automated vehicles is actually going to solve that. Because the reality is it's still just going to sit there. Period. So unless everyone is magically comfortable with not owning a vehicle and being part of a cooperative autonomous vehicle club, which, spoiler alert, I would argue the vast majority of the population would not be cool with, because they have this mentality of needing to own things.
Yep.
It's hilarious when I see people say, well, it's like, well, we can just have these fleets of cars, they'll pick up everyone everywhere. I'm like, thank you. You are just describing socialism. You're telling me that in a world where everyone has this bent on buying things to own them and not have socialism, they are suddenly magically going to convert over to a method where you do not own your vehicle and you are literally part of a cooperative network of vehicles.
And then they're going to say, well, no, it's this one's different, I swear. Not really.
No. We're talking about a shared pool of resources and everyone contributing to them and using them. That is, by definition, if you don't want to use the magical S word, by definition, that is at least a co-op.
No. I do have to pass this by you. Socialism does not equal communism, correct?
No.
Yeah, those are slightly different, to say the least.
All of those definitions and that, some apply to economic systems, some apply to societal systems.
So this gets into really, really deep-rooted, like, craziness with it's not okay, not to use his channel name, but Not Just Bikes. Yep. But it's not just about bikes. No. It's not just about transit. It's actually to do with the understanding of society. And you were mentioning this on our ride along this morning. The fact that people are rushing so much to do their 3 different jobs to just get by, pay rent, etc., save up enough for a single family dwelling, which is a whole other problem because there's missing middle.
Forget saving up to buy a home, just to pay the rent.
Exactly. Like, it's just, so you're doing all of this, you're stressed out, you don't have any time to think about anything. And then when someone brings up a podcast, you listen to it in your car, and then you're like, you gravitate towards these crazy ideas, be like, oh, it's the this or the that. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes there is a boogeyman that it's like, oh, no, there is a systemic problem, but there's also just the systemic problem of overworking, not having enough time to actually sit down, enjoy actual life, and discuss things that like we've been talking about here.
Well, and I'm not going to get into whether capitalism good, capitalism bad. Functionally, what we're seeing is the effects of capitalism and an imbalance in capitalism.
Late stage capitalism?
Whatever you want to call it. Functionally, though, ultimately, it is a function of, and there are some people that would absolutely love and thrive on this, of a closer to pure capitalistic state, where, if you take a look at the medieval times, you had your land barons and you had your serfs. That's capitalism 101. Like, it's a power structure, ultimately, which is part of the reason why it gets conflated with democratic social systems, because there is absolutely a underpinning of power structure in there. But when you take a look at when the US was at its strongest, was when there was the smallest gap between the top earners and the lowest earners. And there's also, a whole interplay of generational wealth and all of that stuff. Yes, sure, okay. But structurally, the US, and this isn't even talking about the whole, breakdown or not breaking down racist social structures as well. It's a huge topic.
Again, this goes so deep.
It goes so deep. But at its core, the US was at its fundamental strongest was when there was the smallest wealth gap between the lowest and the highest earners. This didn't mean that it wasn't a socialist state where, a socialist communist state where everyone earned the same amount. I don't think anyone is saying that. Anyone saying that is functionally, either extreme is bad. But right now we are edging far closer towards the far side where there is these astronomical gaps. And it causes these imbalances where, someone just to get by, to be able to pay for, their kids just to have food and a roof over their head, have to work 3 jobs. And it snowballs into all of these other things where then you have, theoretically, you have to have a car because transit is unreliable. And because you are literally ping-ponging off of the 3 edges of the city. So
to get to your 3 jobs.
To get to your 3 jobs, you have to, make more money to spend more money, to make more money, to spend more money, to make more money, to spend more money.
Yep. Infinite loop. And those jobs that you may take on, because those jobs are not as stable, because if you're doing 3 jobs, unlikely that it's as stable. So then you're more worried about being there late, and then you're going to lose your job, and then you can't pay for the car that you need to get to the job in the first place because you have 3 instead of 2 instead of 1. And it's like, oh my goodness. And then you get stuck.
There's a great song by a Swedish a cappella group called The Real Group. It's called Run, Run, Run. And it's basically saying like, you need to work to make more money, to make more, to work to make more, like, and it's talking about this circuitous death loop that capitalism induces. Okay. And don't get me wrong, I fully recognize the fact that I am a absolute beneficiary of that system. But I'd like it to be way more balanced.
Yeah, I think there can be totally some balance, but I think, on the independent side of things, individual basis, going back to the biking and transit and stuff, if you are able to reduce your expenses, I was gonna bring this up earlier, but the going down from being forced to drive, first of all, but second, if in a relationship with a couple, if both are able to bike, and add some e-bikes in there, so let's say Natalia and I, we've thought about this, and we're like, holy crap, we're saving like 75% more than if we were to own 2 cars. So like breaking it down between us, own 2 cars, pay each of us for the said car and the maintenance and the fuel and the insurance and everything else that goes into that, and the capital cost of the car, or I guess financing if you do it that way, which is most people, because cars are so obscenely expensive in the first place.
I mean, arguably they should be.
Yeah.
For a variety of reasons. I would argue most importantly of all, literally the cost of producing them in human capital. Not the materials, but literally the wages of the people who are working the jobs to make all of the parts.
Yeah, like they are so complex. When you break down, we'll get onto this topic now, the actual bicycle thing is, you can mostly, you're with an e-bike, a heavier one like your cargo bike, there are more components, for sure.
Not that many more.
I was gonna say, it's laughable how few there are though. You look at the thing, it's like, there's wheels, there's this, whatever. Really all it is 2 wheels, a frame, some handlebars, some rubber pieces, some electrical work to run some wires, a motor that is self-contained into the hub, which is even less complicated than mine, which it has to run wires to the back wheel and then blah, blah, blah. But it's a torque sensing motor and then a battery or 2. And you're done. That's it. If something goes wrong, it's not like a car where you have to bring it into, well, you still bring it into the shop, but they can diagnose it or call up the manufacturer.
I'm happy to pay someone else to do something far more efficiently than what I could do myself.
There we go. And actually this came up with the other podcast, and it will come up with all of future podcasts as well, is a lot of people don't care. They do not care about the maintenance. They don't care how the bike works. I'm a little bit nerdy and I like to try to fix it on my own. I would, at this point, I just want to bring it into someone. I just, please, I'll pay you whatever. The amount of savings I get out of the e-bikes is already huge.
It's, it comes down to the time is money, and convenience. You are paying a convenience fee. Take a look at what killed pirating in the 90s and 2000s. Apple and the iTunes store. Yep. Because it was more convenient to spend 99 cents than to roll the dice and put all the guardrails in place to make sure that you didn't download a virus.
And now people are sailing the high seas a lot more now because the streaming services.
Because it's less convenient.
It's not the money, sure, like it costs more for streaming services, but it is really about
convenience.
The splintering and the convenience.
It is more convenient to find files.
I love the way that we're getting around this.
Than to have to figure out which of the 7 streaming services you're paying for has the show you want to watch.
And not even joking here, some series, you go with one streaming service for the first few seasons, and then you go to another streaming service for the other few seasons, then you go to a third for the other set of it's like bonkers. It's like, what? And it's all to do with licensing. I mean, theoretically, it makes sense. From a usability standpoint and user experience, UX stuff, what the heck? It's so bad.
But ultimately, it comes down to convenience. People will go with what is the most convenient. And to talk about wheels, convenience comes in a couple of different ways. And one of those factors is safety.
Yeah.
Safety and ease of getting around.
And we've designed society so that the car is the safest, most convenient, and the most obvious. It's almost
not necessarily the safest, but perceptually the most convenient.
Yes.
Whether or not it actually is the most convenient is a different conversation. But perceptually, it feels that way.
It also does feel safer because
to you.
Yes, and the people buying the huge SUVs and the huge trucks, they are doing that, one, marketing, but two, the marketing also says, hey, you want to be the safest with this incredibly rollover heavy truck? Whoops.
Living room in a box.
Exactly. That's way high up, and if you hit, I just saw this video the other day, we'll get back to your thing in half a second. Huge rolls. This is just in Barrie, Ontario. Someone got pit maneuvered by changing a lane. They spun so many times. They were flipping, the truck turned into a pancake. That, I hope they're okay, but I don't know. That's a lot of weight.
But ultimately, it comes out back to what I said earlier. It is a living room on a box, and that has been spun as the convenience. And fair enough. It's sweet to roll around in, your 19 degrees, 19 centigrade, air conditioned, cushy seats, blasting your music and stuff like that. I'm not going to say that that's not convenient, but we also need to own the fact that that convenience comes at a huge cost to literally everyone else.
This is going to be we'll have to have another chat at some point. Oh, it's so multifaceted. Holy bejeepers. You know what?
It's a problem when you're trying to tackle societally structural problems.
Yeah, and I think this is why it has to be an episodic thing, because it's
but it's also one of the problems that we see with council, with municipal councils and provincial and federal governments, is there is no one. Everyone wants it to be conveniently solved with one bill, with one set of measures, and the problem is that there are so many intertwining things that it's politically inconvenient to try and break it down. It's not sound biteable. It's politically inconvenient to say, you know what? We are structurally effed here. And it's not just something simple where we can wave our magic wand and fix it. You take a look at the housing crisis that Mike Moffat and his podcast are talking about. That intertwines with economic issues, with mobility issues, everything crosses across all of it, and there is no one solution. I love me bike lanes, but But I also know that they're not going to solve everything.
Yep.
Are they a step in the right direction? Yes. Are they going to solve everything?
No.
Hell no.
Yeah. And oh my goodness, I could go in on that because the bike lanes themselves close the street a bit, so they increase safety for drivers, pedestrians, and cyclists. Like,
everyone wants a fast, quick solution that is, a quick thing you can just get it done. But the reality is like, that is not life. But we have been, especially with the pace of technology, we've been spun this narrative where technology will solve it, and it will make everything better, and make it simple, and do it really simply. And so we've structurally lost the fundamental understanding that life is messy and complex, and the solutions to it are messy and complex. And the solutions to solving a bunch of these problems intertwine and interconnect and are going to take time, and they're going to be messy.
going off of that and just referencing what we said earlier, because they're so messy and they take so much time to kind of think about and ponder, and when we're talking about council meetings and decisions and neighborhood decision making and all of that, I think people are not, one, people just don't care about the politics until it affects them directly.
Yep.
But not even that. Some people don't even know, hey, this thing's happening, there's a public consultation meeting, show up. They never get the memo, or they do, and they're like, I don't have time for it because I have to do this, and this. So they don't show up, and then things happen without them having even.
It's there is no answer to this in terms of chicken and egg, but as people get more busy because they have to work more, because they have to do these things to be able to survive, political engagement decreases and goes down. Political engagement is at its lowest, not because people don't necessarily want to be involved. It's that they want to have a moment of downtime in their day, and they don't want to think about the politics. And so until it becomes a pressing need for them in that moment because of X, Y, and Z, they don't get engaged, because they rightfully deserve to have a moment where they just can be. And our lives have gotten so messy and convoluted because of a whole host of issues that we don't have the time to fundamentally sit down and think and be engaged in these things that fundamentally would make our lives less messy and complex.
Immediately in your vicinity, like the local politics is where I'm realizing, holy crap, municipal stuff, that's what impacts your everyday life.
But also there are certain things that there's a news article going around this week where, neighbors are in a certain neighborhood are rightfully asking for traffic calming measures because there have been a string of accidents and incidents, and there are people racing through there.
Is this to do with one of the people on bikes who died yesterday?
No.
Okay. 'Cause that was over on Hamilton Road.
This is the White Hills area.
White Hill. Oh, wow. Okay. Yep. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
And the reality is that right now we fundamentally have a broken method of putting in traffic calming. Forget the fact that every neighborhood street should be traffic calm just from the ground up. That's a different conversation. But fundamentally right now, to be able to get traffic calming in an area, it has to be requested by the neighborhood. Then it has to go to a plebiscite for the neighborhood, and it has to pass 50%. When structurally, it should just be an automatic thing.
And that's for residents, correct?
That's for literally people living right there.
Yeah.
When the reality is that if you have 2 or 3 incidents of injury in a year, it should be an automatic that the city puts in traffic calming measures. It shouldn't be a question mark here, because clearly there is something engineering-wise structurally broken with this area that is inducing people to behave in a way that is not safe. Shouldn't be an emotional political issue. It is literally there is data saying there is people speeding here. Let's fix it. Let's remove the emotion from the conversation here and just automatically put these things in. This is a systemic structural issue that will probably not get addressed simply because it's politically not convenient. People don't want to think about the fact that the cause of these accidents, of these incidents of traffic of like violence against vulnerable people, or just people running into, like drivers running into other drivers, is a structural engineering issue. It is, we have designed it to induce these behaviors. So let's design those behaviors out.
And the fact that drivers are running into buildings, well, every other day, seemingly, like you find London, Ontario news articles about that. That just means that, yeah, it's to do with engineering. Like a safety vest will not save people. Like you, anyway, there's that. And yes, I did see your, I believe it was Basecamp post about that, and it made so much sense. And I know you said that it may not, like it probably won't happen because politics, etc. It actually, I feel like it's the other way around, where it's like, wait, this actually makes sense. Like this would reduce, it bypasses council entirely.
It reduces the political overhead. It reduces the administrative overhead.
Yeah, you were saying, I believe when you were mentioning it in writing, that if one incident involving a pedestrian or cyclist happens, then it gets an audit almost, or like
just automatically.
Yeah, automatic re-engineering, or at least analysis. And then if it was 3 of something else, like incidents
so specifically 3 incidents. And the reason why we can do some of this is, like, when you are in a traffic accident, if there's a police report, if you have to go to the reporting center, they essentially know the cause. So if speed is the cause, or like we know where the vast majority of traffic accidents happen.
Yeah. collisions,
then it's fairly straightforward to go, okay, how many places in a year had these things? How many of them were attributable to speed? Most of them probably.
Yeah.
So, okay, great, just fix it.
Yeah.
Like, it shouldn't be a political issue to want to try, because the reality is people who live in those neighborhoods don't want to have to deal with accidents. But also, statistically speaking, people in those neighborhoods are actually probably the people speeding.
Yes, because there's also this stat where I believe it's 1 kilometer or 2 miles, whatever the thing is, that from home. Yeah, the radii from your radius from your home within 1 or 2 kilometers is where most incidents happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you go on autopilot.
Exactly, because you're very comfortable. You know the street so well that when something changes, like a kid jumping out, suddenly, yo, I did not expect that.
Yep.
Yep. Not a good.
Or you're comfortable, so you're speeding. You're going faster than you should.
Yeah, because I just want to get home, a long day work. Again, not great.
Yep.
And that's where those redesigns and re-engineering of roads come in.
Yep. It ultimately comes down to hierarchy of controls. No amount of education is going to solve these problems. You literally have to engineer the safety problems away.
The human errors, so people distracted driving is huge now because phones, and boredom because people don't like driving. People can tell me they like driving. Sure. Open roads? Sure. Whatever.
Go to a racetrack.
Exactly. Go to a racetrack. That is not everyday driving. Everyday driving is dealing with other people who are, on average, statistically, 50% of people are below average drivers. Fight me. You can't. Stats. That's how that works on averages. And so you're dealing with below average drivers every other other driver. And that is not fun. That you can't appreciate that. So then you're distracted. You're kind of like waiting in traffic because everyone else chose to drive, including you. And so you're not enjoying it. Yep. And then you get impatient, and then you get agitated and angry, and suddenly incidents happen. Yep. And so you have to, through engineering, account for that through, okay, bringing it back to bikes for half a second, that's where the protection comes in, because paint is not protection. But we can actually get into, oh my God, we'll never end this. But maybe we'll wrap this up with what you were saying about William Street and how, and I agree with this, not all streets need bike lanes.
No, they don't. And the reality is like William Street is a great example of a street. It's adjacent to a major road. It's adjacent to Adelaide Street, which is like car sewer. Yep. That's fine. That's fine.
Strodiness.
It's one street over, which means that it's the perfect street for you to get between destinations on. And the reality is that it's a street that, as it currently stands, has been engineered in a way to induce people to not speed and slow down. And so it's a street where there's low traffic volumes, there very low traffic volumes, and it's designed to keep traffic slow. And so you don't need a bike lane there. I'm all for creating neighborhood streets where you don't fundamentally need bike lanes. The problem is that right now, so many of our streets are designed to induce speed that we have no other option other than putting in bike lanes to make it safe for all ages and abilities. Yeah. And so it's about structurally finding that sweet spot where not every street has to have a bike lane, where you can create these calm streets by putting in filtered permeability so people can't use it as a raceway, by narrowing the lanes, by narrowing the lanes at stop signs so that people naturally feel the tendency to slow down.
Which is daylighting.
Which, thank you. All of these things create a calmer street, which then means you don't need, because yeah, if you're riding along there and you're going 15 kilometers an hour because you're riding with a kid, the car has, because everything is so much slower, cars don't feel the need that they have to like punish pass you. They'll pass around you and keep going. You know, it's, no, not every street needs a bike lane, but right now structurally they almost have to, because we have a setup where that's the only way to keep people safe.
And the roads that are residential should not be this wide. The people complaining about, I bring this up occasionally.
The chief reason why neighborhood streets are so wide, and we've been doing a little bit better with newer subdivisions where we're delineating the space better, but it's primarily for vehicle storage. They are wide so that you can park a car on both sides of the street.
In the very few amount of times that you need. So for a party, it's great, but it's like not great for the 99.7% of the other time.
Because it just creates this wide street.
Yeah. Which then it makes it worse for everyone, because again, the halving bit that I mentioned earlier, it's like if you make a street ever so slightly wider and then times that by the every single street in all of this city that you choose to do that, those are kilometers of extra asphalt and width that you now have to travel with either your car or you're walking or biking, and it makes the biking and walking very difficult to do.
And it's interesting because in newer neighborhoods, what I particularly really like this, where you have a narrow right of way, you have a strip of concrete, and then you're raised up into a dedicated parking area.
Yes, yeah, like Edge Valley. As much as I have other things that like issues with other problems, there was unfortunately Annette brought this up, but there was a grade 3 child at Edge Valley in Kalali who got hit and is currently hospitalized. But aside from that, that's just the intersection's fault in that case. But the actual Edge Valley...
There's a solve for that, but that's a different topic.
Exactly, different topic. But what you're saying, it's so simple. It's, you just dedicate some parking spot. You just narrowed the actual road and you added parking, but it's separated by a raised bit, and it slows people down for the most part. Because
it creates the visual separation of concerns.
Yep.
And so when you're driving and moving, you go, oh, I only have this much space to operate in. I will go slower.
I don't want to hurt my car. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which, hey, if that's what it takes, that's good. And it is what it takes. Planting of trees can also help. Yep. And you can actually request that on the London.ca website. There's I forget what it's called. Either way, you can request tree plants, and Natalia and I have done this several times with hundreds of trees having been planted because we're like, hey, London, just so, because staff members can't know everything about every part of the city, because everyone's scattered across. That's how life works. Yep. And so you submit that claim, I'm talking insurance now. You submit a request, a ticket, and say, hey, can you plant trees here in this park because it's desolate, or along a road like Huron Street? We now have trees because there was a lightning strike and it fell down, and yes, this came up on our ride along, and that's why I'm bringing it up. And you're like, what? You can do that? Yeah, you don't have to live in the neighborhood. You can request trees anywhere in London. You can just say, hey, there's a lack of trees. I do this routinely too. I'm like, lack of trees over here. We'll probably be talking at some point again on camera because we have infinite amounts of things to talk about, obviously. But as of right now, what is one thing that you'd like to see changed in London?
Protected grid.
Okay, so when people say that bike lanes are not used and they're like, oh, well, there's a bike lane and I see no one in it in other cities or in London, oftentimes, like, I mean, I ask first thing, I'm like, cool, is it connected to anything?
Yep.
Because if it isn't, no shit.
All you have to do is look at the stats on the Colburn bike lane usage, pre and post, the extensions, and the Dundas cycle track. Like, it went up 300% in usage. And it's, you know, we finally have a mini network. We finally have 9 neighborhoods connected together. So you've got Old North, Woodfield, Midtown, Soho on Colburn. And then for the east-west, for Dundas, you've got Blackfriars, Downtown, Midtown, and OEV. And so you've now got 8, 9 neighborhoods connected. And the stats show. Just if you don't connect people to their destinations, they won't ride, period. And I get it. We're in a double-edged sword. Right now, we are playing infrastructure catch-up. And so it's the most costliest form of putting in protected bike lanes because we're having to retrofit and redesign streets. Totally get that it's the most cost. It is. And so valiantly, the staff do try to put in infrastructure projects when stuff is happening. But the problem is that fragmentation can only work for so long before we fundamentally need a fully connected network, because you won't realize the power until people can go end to end without while not feeling safe.
And a huge danger in doing it in a fragmented way is that people will say, well, look, we added these and no one's using them. And it's like, we didn't do it right. Like, one, they may not be protected, and the high speeds are high speeds. And so then all ages and abilities who are the target for these bike lanes, because mammals or the spandex clad crew, they are probably going to be on the road and they're just flying down, and they're pretty not risk adverse. What's the other one? Risk tolerant. But we're not aiming for that because most people are not those people. Yeah. So
we need to appeal to the 60% of the population who could see themselves doing it, but not in the current state because they don't feel safe doing so. It ties into so many different things, but ultimately, yeah, like if you have a connected network, if you have neighborhoods connected to each other, if you build your neighborhoods, it's unfortunately become a bit of a toxic phrase, but 15-minute cities. Like, it's not saying that you only live within 15 minutes. It just purely means that you have the bulk of your convenience items within a 15-minute walk or bike ride of your home. Not saying that you're going to live in this isolated community that, that you're not allowed to traverse outside of.
Which... But the internet has taken to. Well, oh my goodness.
Politicians have, but either way, the reality is that building these communities and neighborhoods in a way that allow you to do so unlocks so much, and then it's a simple task to connect them.
And reduces traffic for everyone.
Yep.
Because those small trips. Yep. Anyways, we can go on about this, but did you have any other things? I mean, you've said a lot, so there's that. This was great. I quite enjoyed this. I might have to cut it up and be like, what the heck am I going to do with this? Because it's so long. But otherwise...
Long can also be good.
Yeah, exactly. I'm happy. This is great. Wow. I feel like going through this, I'm going to end up being like, okay, let's do another 2 or 3 sit-downs together, and we'll be more focused, because this was like an intro of like a crash course. Be like, hey, let's talk about everything. And
I'm game.
With that being said, I think it's time to wrap it up. So thank you very much for watching. That's it. Thanks.
Have a great day.
Bye.